morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Steve Wolf. I'm a solutions manager at Rally Software. You can think product manager. And I'm actually pleased to be joined today by Kathryn Kuhn. She's an enterprise coach and transformation consultant at Rally. And she's actually going to be our featured speaker today. So I'd like to just spend a little more time introducing her because she's got quite a background and is really a great speaker for this topic. Today's topic is how is Agile working for you, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes. But let's talk about Kathryn's background real quick. Again, she's an enterprise Agile coach and TC at Rally. She's told me that she thinks this is the best job she's ever had because she's with her peeps, and she's also able to work with all kinds of organizations in the world who are struggling or all the way to getting started with Agile and able to really help them be successful with it. She's got a great background. She began her career at Accenture in Washington, D.C. She's done service work in the Peace Corps in Guatemala, we've learned, and that's pretty cool stuff. And lived in Singapore for a while and now calls the Bay Area her home. So she's been practicing Agile techniques for about 12 years in a variety of companies, large and small. She has several certifications from certified Scrum practitioner to certified SAFe program consultant. And before she came to Rally, she was an enterprise coach, Agile coach at HP. And she worked with all kinds of teams there, from small teams of scientists to really large program level teams, if you will, in server and storage. So she's got a great background in the scene Agile in all its various forms and flavors. And again, we'll share a lot of insights with us today. So let's get going. But before we do, let me just go through a few quick housekeeping tips. You should see on your screen a Q&A section. We want to remind you to enter questions as early and often as you have them. We would love to hear all your questions. We're going to answer some during the session today, and then we're going to follow up with answers to the ones we can't get to. So please submit as you go. There's a resources section you'll see as well. We have the presentation in there in the PDF form for you to access. And then we're also going to follow up within 48 hours with a recording. So you'll also be able to replay and re-listen to this going forward. So again, we really encourage you to ask us questions as we go. This is going to be very conversational, and we would really like to weave in your questions very dynamically as we go through this. So let's start with why are we here today? And the way we teed this up, and we actually are seeing this a lot in the market, is are you getting the results you experienced with Agile? Are you at a point where you're even questioning why you're making the investment? We hear this a lot. These are common questions organizations are asking, and they're facing challenges that are leading them to these questions. But we have a ton of experience. We've been at this for a long time. People like Kathryn have seen a lot of these situations, and we can help you identify the challenges, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. And we can also help you learn what high-performing Agile does look like, and we're going to show that by sharing some real examples. Kathryn will from her real-world experience, and that's the best way to really understand what you could attain with work. So at the end of all that, we'll then talk about steps you can take to realize that full potential. Let's start with a poll question first. So this will give us a little background. So it's going to give you about 30 seconds to answer this one. This will give us a little background just to understand what your current approach to implementing Agile is and help us frame the discussion as we go forward. Kathryn, what do you see here in companies' approaches typically, or anything of note in your recent experience?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of, as I'm traveling around to all our different, Rally customers and prospects, all over the world, I do a lot of listening as people tell me what's going on and, what at least maybe their approach to an Agile transformation or how they're trying to take their company and explore Agile concepts more deeply. And, listening and trying to figure out, what are, a lot of people ask me, what's the best approach? And, this is the approach we're taking. And these are some of the ones that I hear fairly frequently. And so we really want to see, if, the folks out there on the phone are taking similar approaches. Some especially are taking more of a team-centric approach. Others are taking something that's more of a centrally led program, usually out of a program office or some kind of centralized steering committee, where they drive the approach to how Agile is going to be adopted in their company, as well as other variants.
Well, that's great. Let's take a look at our audience and how they find themselves today. It's a really interesting question because I think it speaks in plain language to a lot of the places we see that organizations find themselves. Kathryn, what do you think of these results? It's pretty interesting.
Wow, it is. It's great. It's interesting that it's such a almost even split between at least the top three things that that we listed up here. So the first one, that the teams know best what they need, I see that one a lot in high tech. And that especially in here, I live in Silicon Valley, and so I see that phenomenon fairly frequently here about letting the teams drive their approach. The second one being more program office led, still see that one also, pretty much across all the different industries, just because there's this belief that you need to have a methodology, and that everyone needs to follow the same methodology, and therefore there must be templates that we need to follow. So therefore, using a central program office led approach seems to resonate, with those thoughts. And then, of course, there's the leadership team, the thought that, we said we're going to be agile, so if we say it often enough, it's like an affirmation. If we say it enough, then maybe it must be so, right? And so sometimes I see that a little bit as an approach as well.
Well, I guess the good news here is that at least seems like for the most part understands that Agile is an approach to at least consider, and if not already started and finding themselves in one of these first three places. So I'm confident Kathryn's really going to talk about all three, the top situations, and what she's going to talk about today, and really help you understand where you're at if you're in one of those places, and how to move forward and push forward from there. But before we go into that, I just want to thank Kathryn again for taking time out of her busy schedule. She delivers probably every week services working with some of our largest customers, in fact, mostly our largest customers. Very, very senior, as you've seen from her background, and here at Rally we have a whole team of very senior transformation consultants, and they've seen it all. They're in very high demand. But I'm pleased to have Kathryn join us because she's passionate about this topic and really wanted to share some of her thoughts. So why are you so busy, though, Kathryn?
Yeah, no, I know. It's really tough. It took us a couple of weeks just to pin me down to do this webinar. And it's really an interesting phenomenon out there. For about 10 years ago, Agile at the team level was really getting explored. Lots of people were experimenting, but there were these kind of small, isolated experiments. Sometimes in a lot of times in smaller companies, and also in larger companies. And then about 5-6 years ago, Agile, scaling Agile as a concept really started to take off. And when we talk about scaling Agile, it means not just how do I do Agile with, large teams like of 100 people, but also how do I take this Agile thing from being this, pilot or almost skunk works that I've hidden deep inside a large company, and how do I give it context and actually make it work for me within the context of a larger company and with the context of a very large product. So scaling actually can mean, both things. And about 5-6 years ago, as companies really started to explore this, they started looking for frameworks, they started looking for best practices. They started to, they created slideware and made SharePoints and started to train a lot of people and in all these new vocabulary words like story points and Scrum and stand-ups. And they really hoped that, that this was going to really bring about this change where the company could be more nimble and more responsive to customer needs. And then about 9 to 12 months later, they started looking around and going, we're just not as awesome as we'd hoped to be by now, trying all of these Agile methods. And that's when I get a phone call that said, Kathryn, what's going wrong? What is it about our approach to all this Agile stuff that just, isn't working? We're just not seeing the benefits that we had hoped to by now.
Yeah, and I think I've already suggested you're getting a lot of calls, and I certainly see that as I watch you work. But who's calling you? How would you describe the types of companies who are struggling here?
Yeah, so as you can see from the slide of some, and this is just a small selection of Rally customers, that this isn't isolated to be just a high tech thing. Initially, that's what a lot of people wrote it off as, oh, that's just something that people do with software development companies or high tech, or oh, that's just a Silicon Valley thing. We're working with customers all over the world in pretty much every industry. I'm amazed at the number of financial services companies that we're talking to, insurance companies, the travel industry, manufacturing companies. This is not just an isolated high tech thing. It is definitely sweeping all countries and almost every single industry.
That's excellent. Well, certainly a lot of people have made the move to Agile, as we saw from that initial poll, and again find themselves in various states. And really, Agile applies to almost anyone doing software. We would actually declare anyone. So, it's interesting to see that we are realizing that as we look at the spectrum of people who are now asking, for input on how to get better at it. So when they do ask that question, what do they tell you about their journeys? What do they say about transformation? How do they say it's specifically going for them?
So, like I said, I do a lot of listening, and I'll give you some examples of some of the things people tell me about, some of the pain they're experiencing. And the first one is they, one of them they talk to me about is they say, wow, this Agile and this scaled Agile framework thing, it has a lot of meetings, too many meetings, in fact. And so they feel very overwhelmed by all these meetings and the strain of it all, and we can't get any work done because we're so busy having all of these crazy meetings. So then I start probing in on that and ask them questions about, so for example, why don't you talk to me about some specific meetings? Let's talk about sprint planning, for example. How long does it take for you to plan your sprints? And sometimes people will answer and tell me, it takes us 2 to 3 days of meetings, all day to finish sprint planning for a 2-week sprint. And just to give you guys a sense of comparison, we tell our clients, and one of the best practices is that it should take you roughly 1 hour of planning for every sprint, or for every week in your sprint. So that 2-week sprint should take you 2 hours to complete your planning, not 2 to 3 days. So, and then we talk through some other things like release planning and stand-ups, which should be ideally 15 minutes, are routinely an hour or more. One team told me about it, that they have twice a week 2-hour stand-ups, which sound more like status meetings to me than actual stand-ups. And so, that's kind of the first big complaint. And, I don't know about you, but I would also hate to be in all those meetings if they were that inefficient and not sticking to the time box challenge that Agile has set forth.
So you just described several symptoms of people being really challenged with making Agile really work for them, and I know we're going to discuss and describe more of these as we go forward with this webinar. But let's pause. Let's ask one more poll question. What we'd like to do is hear from our audience the challenges they are facing, and here's some things that we commonly see, and we'd love people to weigh in on these. And you can check any and all that apply here. Certainly, Kathryn described the first one very well. Kathryn, any other of these that you want to touch on as people cast their votes?
Yeah, so the second one I hear a lot, where there's just way too much overcommitting, that, fine, we do our sprint planning and we tell the team, the management team what we can commit to, and we're still challenged to, work something else in, and, well, you still have to do more, or, for some reason we just feel pressure to overcommit for whatever reason. So I see that one a lot. There's also this notion that you're supposed to roll from sprint to sprint and release or program increment to program increment and just kind of keep going on a regular cadence. But it's really hard to take time out to plan the next sprint or to plan, and definitely to plan the next release while you're executing the current one, especially in the late stages when you're busy with defects, defect remediation, and maybe final touch-ups on your feature feature development. So I hear that one a lot, that it's just really hard to time slice and to keep both going. I hear a lot around tools and struggles with tools and which are the best ones to pick, as well as a lot of coping and supplementing with PowerPoint and Excel around the shortcomings in the tools. And then, of course, a lot of people are talking to me about essentially training fatigue. That they've gone through loads of training and learned lots and lots of vocabulary words and sat in these meeting rooms and conference rooms and learned and trained and taken tests, but they still have loads of questions about, well, what does this mean and how are we going to do this? Actually, I haven't really learned how to apply it for my particular product or my particular context. And then finally, it's that sense of, we've tried this Agile thing, but I'm not sure that things have actually improved. How do we know we're actually getting better? Some days I feel like it's actually gotten worse. And so I hear a lot of that as well.
Well, let's see what we're hearing today from the audience. And I can already see that there's a spectrum of answers here, and that really indicate that people are in really various places in their Agile adoption and finding some challenges along the way. Anything jump out at you here for you, Kathryn, as you look at these results?
Yeah, so again, it's really it's great to it's interesting validation to see that people are basically seeing all these patterns. So none of these were just kind of isolated experiences. The overcommitting one, that one really shot out and kind of differentiated it from the pack. I'm my instincts see. I see this a lot, and I pretty much have yet to not see this when I work with Rally clients and prospects and see this phenomenon. So that tells me a lot, and I thank everybody for sharing this feedback.
And likewise, and we're going to dive into some of these topics a little further and really talk about what causes these things to happen in organizations and how to move from that state into a better place where you are more productive. The very first one, is death by PowerPoint, I guess I'd say, Kathryn. How do you want to describe this slide?
Yeah, so what happens is that, I meet with client teams, and usually these are, kind of centralized management teams or steering teams or out of a program office. And, they're really proud of all the work they've done because, they've worked really hard to create lots of training materials. They've done a lot of work evaluating various, frameworks for scaling Agile and best practices. And they've created, probably a SharePoint site to house all of these slides that they've created. And then they complain that no one goes to the SharePoint. So how do they get people to, come and see and, and read and use all these materials that they've created? They also tend to show me some kind of tool that they've customized heavily, with lots of complicated workflows and permissions and lots of mandatory fields that people have to fill out every time you write the story. But again, nobody's filling out the fields. So they're not getting the data they want, and therefore, they're not able to, measure the results that they want to measure. So I see this one pretty often, where they're really struggling with how to attract people into this scaled method, use the tools the way they're meant to be used.
And then once they get into some level of execution and tooling and working forward, what do you see? I look at the word scattershot here, and that means something to me, but I'd love to hear you describe it.
Yeah, and so this is another interesting phenomenon that happens, is that when you go and you start adopting Agile, and especially when you let teams lead the approach, which, again, like I said, I see this a lot in very engineering-oriented organizations. They tend to let the teams do what they need to and pick their own tools and move at their own pace of Agile. And then they look at me and they go, but those people, that we let them do anything they want to, and they're still not happy. Those development teams aren't happy. And I've got this extra problem in that, my program office and my QA organizations are also really unhappy because they think we in a way cater to engineering too much and, quote, let them get away with everything. And the common thread I see in all these different patterns and questions or problem sets that people are expressing to me is that it's lack of alignment and it's lack of buy-in. It's this phenomenon on the left where it's a real scattershot approach where everybody's trying to move, with their own objectives and imperatives, but they're not creating the buy-in across the company or across their whole program teams to make sure that everybody's not only doing Agile, but they're embracing what it means to make collaborative decisions. And we talk about collaborative decision making. It's not just that you made the decision, but that it also sticks. And that is, on the right, that's what we find is the secret to a transformation is that you've got to create this alignment in order to move, really transform and move your program teams forward.
It's interesting, Kev. I just had a question come in, and it's somewhat related to alignment, I think. Let me go ahead and ask it and see what you think. The gentleman asked, the biggest meeting gripe we get is the sprint review meeting itself. People say they're wasting their time listening to stuff that doesn't involve my team. That sounds like an alignment issue to me. How do you react to that?
Absolutely. And, if you're not sure why you should be there, then that's a great question to ask. Because whoever's facilitating that meeting or responsible for the agenda should be able to answer, what's in it for me? Why is it your presence is important? And it's amazing what happens when you stop and consider that. Why is my presence important? Sometimes your meeting attendees just need that confirmation. Yeah, my input really is important, and it really does help me do my job better. And in other cases, I've had people, when they finally sat down and wrote this out and confirmed this with their attendees, some people who really thought they had to be in meetings looked and said, I don't need to be here. I've got empowered decision makers that can be here for me, so my presence really isn't as mandatory as I once thought. And so it inspires a really awesome conversation when you start confirming what is the goal of your meeting and what is in it for your attendees.
Yeah, and make it worthwhile, right? Make them feel part of the process for doing the things that a team needs to do, but not involving them when they don't need to be, because that is the biggest time waster for folks and a big frustration point. I think we've all felt that at some time in our working lives.
Absolutely.
So then, those are a lot of symptoms and challenges. We could probably spend a lot of time on any one of these. We don't have time to go through everything today. But let's move on a little bit and start talking about the right answers. How do you get that alignment that we're talking about?
Yeah, and it really is, it's a balancing act. It requires both an iterative and incremental approach across a number of different areas, such as training and communication and your tools and your leadership. You need to create what I often call intentional alignment structures across your teams so that you can get both a top-down and a bottom-up view. You need to be able to create enough aligning structures so that you can empower teams and decentralize decision-making enough so that teams are able to make local optimized decisions as much as possible. But at the same time, you need to make sure that everyone stays aligned to the same mission and goals and objectives at both a product vision level as well as your current release and upcoming releases down to your quarter and your month and your sprint, and at all different levels. And so it's a tough balancing act. You can't just take one approach of just a bottom up, or just a top down. You need both.
So how do you know then? How do you detect or determine that you're falling into one or more of those traps?
Yeah, it's really hard. The first thing I would say, well, if you were nodding your head vigorously earlier when I was talking or, answered some of these polls, then you're probably falling into, one of these traps of, being too heavily oriented towards being either, overly process-led or overly top-down or, overly letting the teams do whatever they want. So what we do is when we land a client, when I landed a client, is I do a big big round of empathy interviews. I hesitate assessment because that implies that there's a grade or a judgment at the end.
Well, wait a minute. I hear the people ask for assessments all the time. I think it's, again, maybe a natural thing to ask for, but it's a pretty common request.
Yeah. It is. It's a very common request, and I do get a lot of customers and prospects saying, come in and do an Agile assessment for you. And really what Rally likes to do is instead this concept called we meet you where you are. And we ask you a lot of questions and work with you about, what about your existing Agile processes and where are you in this scale of Agile maturity? And, and how are your organizations structured? Some of them are tightly integrated. Some of them are heavily siloed. Some of them have lots and lots of centralized functions. Some of them are more componentized. And so we look at your organizational structures. We talk to you about your metrics, and then we also talk about your culture and your company culture, about, how are you at this thing called collaborative decision making. And so we get a really good sense of, where are you in your current Agile journey, and how are you approaching it today.
How long does this typically take? It sounds like a very involved process to really learn what's going on.
It can. It depends on the customer and how fast I can get access to people. One group I recently worked with, I did a round of interviews and completed them all within 2 weeks. And some I've done even faster than that. So, and it's really just a round of, it's like 30-minute interviews that I do on the phone, and I stick to my time boxes very, very strictly, and I make my promise that there are no action items at the end of the interview. So I usually get really good answers when I make those two promises.
So you're really learning. This is not a survey. This is not a quiz. I mean, you're really, really learning what the reality is in the organizations you're talking to.
Absolutely, because it's a learning process for all of us. And most companies have put something some kind of structure in place. And so my job is to come in and sense and figure out, what have you already got put in place for your Agile transformation, and trying to find some of the gaps. Where is it that we can help you color in more details?
Great. So let's go back to those symptoms or those signs that people are struggling as you go through that interview process. Let's talk about that a little further.
Yeah, so one of my favorite places to listen for clues, not just during these empathy interviews, is the release planning meeting. And I learn a lot about how teams work together by listening to the preparation meetings leading up to and actually the release planning meeting itself. And so I look and see, and observe, how are the product owners doing, and are they feeling a lot of pain trying to prioritize and to prepare all of their stories and features and epics leading up at walking into this release planning meeting? Are there goals for this particular release that they're planning, and are these good goals, or do they seem to just be a repeat list of all the features that are being requested? How involved are the architects? And then also other things I observe are, the development managers and how they're involved in this process. And are they, what we know they need to be, which is champions for extreme programming practices and champions for really good development practices. And, of course, is there a user experience architect involved in these conversations? So release planning, this picture here is from a client of ours that brought together about 320 people every time they do a release planning event. And it's really just an amazing thing to watch in terms of coordination. And, of course, it takes a lot of preparation and planning to pull off an event of this size. My other favorite place to go is the system demo. The system demos are really interesting to see because, first of all, are they even occurring? And I listen hard to the pushback on system demos. Are they regularly? They should be at the end of every sprint so that you can see the work of all the teams that are involved in a release coming together as a demo. And how much heroics does it take to pull one of these system demos off? And this tells me a lot about the development practices within the team and how good essentially the underlying principles and practices are within the development community in a particular program.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. That looks like a pretty big meeting. Do you find challenges getting people to want to really collaborate in release planning like this?
Absolutely. It's hard to get people to collaborate in a meeting even like 1/3, maybe even 1/10 the size of this. So imagine the challenge of trying to bring a meeting together of this many people. Obviously, you can't have just one facilitator. You need multiple people facilitating and on the ground, making sure that people know what they should be doing, that when they have questions, they need materials, just all the logistics and planning to pull this together. And then also, when there's conflict, managing a room this large whenever there's a conflict or difference of opinion is really challenging. And you need to make sure that you have really strong facilitation and really strong facilitation team in place in order to pull off an event of this size.
So that sounds like a lot again. And but is it worth it? Are you finding organizations benefiting from taking this approach?
Absolutely. Time and time again when we talk to our customers, especially this one here that came and talked to us and just said, we wish we had met Rally sooner. That they were able to achieve their objectives months in advance in terms of launching, that they've seen an uptick in not just in the collaboration, but that people are happier, that they feel much more a part of their programs. One of the stories they told was they initially kept their IT department outside of their release planning because they didn't think they needed to be impacted. And then as they learned and felt more comfortable and inviting IT to be part of their conversations, both their relationship with their IT department suddenly became much more collaborative and less combative, and certainly less like contracts where they said, we need you to provide thus and such by this date, and then and they push back and say, well, that's not the letter of the requirement that you gave me at least 9 months in advance. And so companies are finding that the quality of their interactions and the quality of their collaborations go way up, as well as just those aligning structures. They're able to achieve their business objectives not just sooner, but with a lot less heroics.
I'm glad you brought that up, Kathryn, because I hear this a lot too, and we do a lot of these events with customers because it's really the most powerful part of what we do when we work with customers to just be great at Agile. I've heard people say, by bringing everyone together, we're actually able to have the right conversations we would have maybe never had otherwise, to help resolve issues and move things forward. And there's another element to this, which is commitment. You can come up with a plan that everyone buys into. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. As well as we bring some of our best practices for how to document decisions and how to get people to buy into on a decision. It's the famous Rally Fist of 5, where we get people to vote on a scale of 1 to 5 and therefore express not just their support, but maybe they support, I may not be wholeheartedly supportive, but I'm pretty supportive, or maybe, it's I can live with this decision and support it. So it's not a resounding support, but I can live with it. And as well as a way of expressing, I actually have some problems with this, and I really need to express what my reservations are. So we love Fist of 5 in Rally.
We did get one question about this event, and it's really simple. You mentioned 320 people. Why so many, or do they all need to be in the room?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It's really expensive to bring that many people into the room. And the way I talk about it and get customers to figure out whether it's for them is I say, well, what's the cost of not being aligned? Think back to your last release and how much misalignment was costing you in extra meetings, extra documentation, maybe missed dates, missed expectations, defects that you especially defects that are found actually by your customers that should have been found and could have been found in your quality processes and your testing processes. And think about the cost of all of that misalignment. then look at the cost of bringing all these people together and see if it's for you. In some cases, they're not that misaligned and it's not that big of a deal, and so maybe it's not worth bringing all these people together. In other cases, there's been a lot of misalignment, and so when you line that all up, you absolutely can justify the cost of bringing all these people together for 2 days.
I actually have another interesting question come through. Alignment is so key at every level. And this is actually a fairly basic question, but I think it's really relevant in that they're asking about the meeting itself. How could you possibly do a daily stand-up with a team this size?
It's hard, and it's really hard when you get into cross geographies. I came out of an environment where I was routinely doing stand-ups. I'm in California, so I was on the phone with people in Europe as well as I had to meet with people that are in Asia. So at any one time, someone's in their pajamas when you try to do a daily stand-up, no matter what time of day you pick. And so that's when I usually start looking at teams and saying, well, there's coping approaches, and you can do things like alternate time zones. But there's other things that maybe you need to start looking at, well, what's the cost of having people so geographically distributed? And is there a better way that we can organize ourselves so that maybe we're not trying to bring so many people from so many different geographies together? And so I've worked with some clients who have then worked to create teams with the skill sets they need closer to the time zones that they're in. I've seen teams reorganize a little bit and reassign people so that they can get less geographic distribution, especially across time zones. And then using other techniques like bringing in video cameras and making sure that you can promote collaboration, as well as breaking down the team size. Trying to do a stand-up with 25 people is really hard, and so maybe you might want to think about breaking your team size down into a smaller number of people so they can be much more effective.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because this is a release planning meeting, and when you're at that stage, when you actually are determining what the plan is going to be, it's super valuable to have everyone together for just the reasons we talked about, the alignment and the collaboration. But once you have a plan, then you go off and execute to that plan. You're not bringing all 320 people together at the same time, but you still might find that your teams aren't organized optimally for them to work together in an efficient manner. Maybe they are too distributed. So there are ways to help with that as well. Okay, let's move on. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what happens after the interview. So we can start to show ways that you can actually improve and work through some of these challenges.
Yeah, so we bring a proven approach that we call Ready, Sync, Go. And this approach helps us get all these Agile teams back in alignment, as well as create enough transparency to help those mid-level managers and directors essentially lift their gaze so they can focus on truly important questions. We've launched program teams on average in about 3 months, and we've done some even faster in some cases. It just depends on how much structure and aligning structures are there, availability of people, as well as various other maturity conversations that we have around Agile.
And then what happens at the start of that? Let's dig in a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah. So the first part is what we call, we call ready. So that's when we do some of those empathy interview questions. We look at the tools that are in place and the organizational structures. We start looking at key roles that teams need to have that are beyond Agile at the team level, such as in Scaled Agile Framework, it's somebody to operate as the release train engineer. And do you have somebody that's ready to step into that role? And also when it comes to product ownership, there's usually a number of different structures in large companies. Sometimes there's councils. I heard one, triads. There's product managers. There's product owners. There's business analysts. So we take a good hard look at those structures to make sure that everybody's aligned and that we understand, that the roles and responsibilities that people are going to play, is that all ready to go? And of course, all the tooling in place, ready and prepared so that we can start with synchronizing, which is looking at your value streams, coming up with, based on your value streams, which are the best mix of Agile release trains that we should be creating that need to create these alignments what synchronization, what structures should we have, how long should our sprints be, how long do our program increments or releases need to be, and then also synchronizing on terminology. Really common ones are things like, an epic. What's an epic? And trying to make sure that we're all, in sync and prepared, and then go. Then we start launching Agile release trained teams, getting them trained up, and actually running their first release planning meetings and getting them go, and as well as doing the retrospectives at the end of each sprint and at the end of each release, so that we can start to instill this continuous learning, continuous experimentation mindset that is so crucial to Agile and very crucial to getting Agile at scale to work.
So I imagine as you go through this, you find gaps, definitely areas to focus on. Can you give some examples around that?
Yeah, so when we look at gaps, I talk a lot about doing an iterative and incremental approach, that you don't just come in and do all the training and then say, great, I don't have to do any more training after that. We definitely talk about, wanting to make sure we go iterative and incremental across all these different concepts. So, for example, one client, I came in and they had coaches, and they even had like a communications director in place, which was a great start. So what we did is we came in and we helped fill in some of the gaps around what does steering mean. And, you've got a lot of different products that operate fairly independently. So how do we create enough alignment across all these different business units and across all these different coaches so that you can launch your program teams with some consistency and take advantage of your centralized frameworks, but at the same time allow for, autonomous low-level business and decision-making at the lowest levels possible. Other clients want us to go from a pilot out. So, for example, we'll come in and we'll work maybe only with one particular program team, and we'll do a Ready, Sync, Go as kind of an example set. And then in rapid succession, we'll start just doing, Ready, Sync, Go with, program team after program team, and then we'll create the aligning structures and lay in the coaches as we go. So again, we talk about, there's no one way that you do this, and that it's really important to do an iterative and incremental approach.
You just can't make this happen instantly. It takes time, right?
Absolutely. I've worked with clients who said, what if I just sweep across everybody and make, this training mandatory? I mean, everybody's got to take, these, 16 hours worth of classes, and then once they're done, we should be Agile, right? And that's when we say, well, training is absolutely a component, and at some point you do want to give people even more advanced training, but maybe we need to take a little bit of a training holiday, and let's start working on some of these other aspects like organizational change. How is it that how are you at collaborative decision making, and these transparency values of Agile? Are people embracing it? And maybe let's start coloring in on some of the cultural aspects of this Agile transformation.
Sounds to me like Agile in and of itself is not a process. There's far more to it, and it takes time to practice and get good at it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. It is definitely a culture of continuous improvement and continuous learning, which goes along with, that's a cultural value in itself. It's really hard sometimes for us, especially as adults, to hold up what we just did and think about how you can improve. We often like to think in terms of, success or failure. It was either great, awesome, and it was great and we were highly successful, or we were not. And instead trying to teach people this vocabulary of, hey, I ran this experiment and we learned a lot in this experiment. And the learning in itself was the awesome thing. And it could be that you learned that this was really not a good way to run a release planning meeting, or that, certain techniques just didn't really work out. We didn't have the right people in the room, and that we need to change that up. But instead we see things, either it's just positive or just negative. And so really trying to teach teams, especially that ability to reflect, is really important.
Yeah, so there is no cookbook here. It takes practice and time, and also adaptation to the organization needs. that you find yourself in even, right? There's a lot of variables that go in, but fundamentally I think it's a culture change. I mean, it's a different way of doing things, and you need a buy-in everywhere, and you have to figure out how that works for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's see what else goes on in terms of, I love these stories and these examples, but what else do people, I think we talked up front about, is the investment worth it? How do you even know that you're doing the right thing? Even as you feel like you're getting better at practice, how do you know?
Yeah. So a really big topic that comes up is metrics. How does one measure an agile transformation? Like you said, how do you know you're getting better? And then there's usually a race to some metrics. And I do see a lot of anti-patterns, in the community as our clients and prospects show me their metrics. Sometimes it's a lot of what we call vanity metrics, such as, these are the number of teams we have trained, or these are the number of teams that we have using a particular tool, so therefore they must be agile, right? If they're using some kind of, a Scrum-based tool. The other anti-pattern I see is a lot of misuse of agile metrics, like velocity. And using velocity more as a proxy for capacity, and then setting goals like you need to increase your velocity by 20%. And velocity, for those of you who may not know, is it's an average. It's a lagging indicator. It's a rear view glance, and it's also meant to be a range, and it's also unitless. So for a manager to then say, oh, we need to increase velocity by 20%, it's not like pushing on the gas pedal on a car and increasing your miles per hour. What happens is most people just start inflating their estimates, and voila, you've got an increase of 20%. And then the other thing I see a lot is a really unbalanced scorecard. So we bring in, when I work with customers on their metrics, I bring in this rally concept of a balanced scorecard, where we want to make sure that when we look at metrics, that we don't overly hone in on one particular metric. That we want to make sure that we look at metrics that tell us, are we doing our work fast enough? Are we responsive enough? And are our teams productive? On the right-hand side, are we doing it right? Are there quality metrics in place? Do we have a good quality product? Or for example, do our customers really like our products? Can we do it on time? How predictable are we at development and predicting when we're going to have certain features completed? And then finally, that continuous improvement metrics that usually are reflected in some kind of, employee engagement metric. And when I first start working with clients, more often than not, I find that top right group, the do it right, is overly filled in with quality metrics. That they usually have loads of quality metrics, maybe a smattering on on some productivity, and probably very rarely do I find that they're doing predictability. And then there's this begrudging on the lower right-hand side around employee engagement. Yeah, we do an employee survey every year, and we cringe at the results every time as if we don't really want to know how unhappy our people are. So we work on balancing the scorecard of metrics.
And using them the right way, I'm sure as well, because you already gave a great example of velocity. You can definitely skew how people behave just based on what you emphasize in your metrics. So you have to be really, really thoughtful about it and use them for the right reasons.
Absolutely. I often say use your metrics for good, not evil.
Well, those statistics. So then it sounds like, okay, this is more than a process, right? There's a lot that has to happen to scale Agile and be good at it. So go through this ready, see, go process, get some metrics established, and you're done, right? Things are magically better, and you're off and running. Would you agree with that?
No, I mean it's a journey, like I said, of continuous improvement. And one of the best examples I can give is Rally's own journey through this idea of Agile at the team level and scaling. So for example, Rally released our first SaaS version in May 2004. And, so we've been at this Agile thing a long time. And, when we first started, with this Agile at the team level, and, a lot of us stalled, and a lot of us start with these, program teams, start here with the big batches of large annually funded programs, and then we try and, do Agile things there. So then we broke off and tried to do it at the team level. And for the most part, at the coaching and coaching at the team level, you can get some level of flow going at the team level, but it's really hard with individual coaching at individual teams to get much value up at the program. And so again, then you try with more of a DIY approach to scaling, and that's where you can get it to the point where you can break down some of your batches and start working and getting your program teams together, but you never really get to that business value and that overall flow from idea all the way to your customers' hands where you're getting feedback and feeding that back into more ideas and then developing out and getting that continuous flow and feedback loops of testing different products and features with your customer base and your prospect base.
Yeah, and I think even a more recent example of Rally, and feel free to comment on this as well, but we always seek to tune and improve how we do things, and we're in the business, right? We do Agile every day, and we've recently done some work even in our own internal IT or R&D group where we spent time looking at our practices and determining how we can get better, and we've seen a fantastic improvement even in the last 2 quarters. With how much we've been able to deliver and how much value we provided to our customer with a high acceptance rate, a high degree of quality. So there's no end to the journey, no matter how good you're at. I'm certain you would agree with that, Kathryn. But we see it all the time that you're never done. You're always getting better. You're always bringing new people in. You're always bringing new programs and new projects into the mix.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's. Before we close, I think we have some questions that have come in that are certainly germane to some of the past few slides. So let me go ahead and ask them and love your insights on these. First one is someone is actually getting ready for their first, they call it a PI planning event, so this release planning event that you described. They're doing it in a few weeks, and they've done a lot of preparation and planning up front. They want to know the top 3 things you would advise to make that event super successful.
Top of the list, great facilitation, and that your facilitator should not be your subject matter expert. That especially if you've got a large number of people in the room, it takes a lot of work to make sure that the voices are heard, that people are paying attention, that you're having great conversation, but also when to parking lot, maybe some topics for later, when to maybe break out, that it's a great issue. Maybe this small team of people should go off and examine that topic and bring the information back into the larger team. So first and foremost, awesome facilitation separate from your, and also making sure you're time boxing and you're sticking to your time box so it's a good, effective meeting. The other thing I would say is make sure that when you walk in there that your mission is really clear, that you've got, if there's one thing you can fix between now and then, it's making sure that you've got really clear and aligning goals and transcending goals. So it's clear that when you're done, imagine the future, it's now you're done with this release, and it was awesome. And the reason it was awesome was because you, and then fill in the blank. Was it one, very crucial feature, or if it was because our people were happy because no vacations were canceled, what is it that made it an awesome release? And share that with the team when you start.
Boy, I'm going to ask you a few more. Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions on the release planning event that you've described. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. Let's see how the answers go. And then I think we're going to have to close from there. But let's stay on this theme. The next one is, and we touched on this a bit earlier, but a lot of organizations have globally distributed teams, and bringing 320 people together, or whatever the number is, when you're bringing people in from all over the world, even. How do you do that? How do you address that challenge?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different challenges or things that you can do. I talked a lot about the ROI. Look at the cost. The cost of misalignment versus the cost of the event. In Rally, what we've done is we've actually, we've got some distributed teams. We started using one of our tools called FlowDoc to supplement our release planning events so that we can make better use of remote people. So sometimes, we experimented with cameras, didn't work so well. People came in and out. It was hard to hear, especially when you're in a big conference room. If you're remote, it's really hard to pull that off. So we were really reaching the limit of what we could do with video cameras and video conferencing. But we're finding that our FlowDoc tool has really helped supplement. And of course, using the Rally tool in conjunction with FlowDoc, in conjunction with some level of video conferencing, is really helping us hone in on, at least when the times when we can't get everybody together, to at least make those release planning events more effective. So that then when we get back together and we are all in the same room, we do what we call find the feeling. We remind ourselves what it feels like to be in the same room together and to be highly collaborative, so that when we break and when we do release planning events that are more remote, we understand the feeling we're trying to create with all these remote tools.
I would just add to that it is practical reality that organizations can be kind of widespread, far-flung, if you will, and it's hard to bring them together every quarter. But I would emphasize that especially the first one or two, where you're really trying to establish the process and establish the collaboration and how things are going to be done and done better, it's really, really best to get everyone there and make that investment at least at first, and then find ways to bring in some technologies to help as you go forward. I know of a customer that I work with who did just that, and now they're at a point 2 years in where they're probably on their 12th release planning event where they are actually able to use video and other technologies and allow people to be remote. But they did get everybody there for the first few and got things established, and it has been really effective for them. One more, and then we're going to wrap it up. The last question, because it's really, again, on theme, and it gets back to one of the things we also talked about, which is it's expensive. You just told me that even if it's for the first few, I should still bring the 300 people together. It's expensive. How do I measure the effectiveness of that? Let me say, how do I know it was worth that investment in everybody's time?
Yep. And then the first thing I'll say is, at the end of a meeting like that, you do a retrospective. Before you break and you let everybody go, you ask everybody, what did you think of this meeting? What was good? What was not good? How can we improve? So first, you'll get a lot of really interesting responses as people say, I met people I'd never met before. I had, now that I can see your face when you're talking and you say certain things, now I really understand what you mean. You make personal connections that transcend email, and especially email or tools, and especially defect tools. And trying to transcend all these tools with feelings and connections and human connections that people have. The other thing I would say is, now that people get the understanding of what it's like to run an effective meeting and time boxes and how important this is, and you've put in place all these aligning structures so that everyone hears at the same time the same message about why this is an awesome release. At the end, this is an awesome release because we did this. And those aligning objectives, and rather than just a feature list, are really crucial for making sure that you don't have all these missed expectations and you're not managing enormous lists of risks and dependencies, and that people collaborate more. And so, again, it's that, less heroics, less effort in order to get to probably the same place you could without the meeting, but you've got people that are a lot happier, and therefore you can retain them. So I'll stop there.
Yeah,
I could go on.
You can go on any one of these questions and any one of even the challenges we've discussed for quite a while. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. We're down to our last few minutes. So any parting thoughts, Kathryn, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, so I want to leave everybody with probably one of my most favorite quotes right now when I talk to groups about scaling Agile. And it's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this really speaks to me because, we fall into this trap a lot with Agile because we know it would be just so much easier and faster if, if myself or my company or my management team would just leave me alone, and my team knows what to do, so just leave me alone. Just give me my requirements and I'll go develop them and things will be fine. And you're probably right. You probably could develop those requirements really fast, but that's not, and you'll get someplace, but that someplace may not be where the whole company needs to go. And it's certainly not a sustainable way to run a team or a company. And so you need to find a way to walk your Agile journey together and aligned so that you go far as a company and as a program team. So with that, I'll end. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn, for your time today. And again, I know you're very busy, and these are great insights, and we hope to be able to share more of these with folks as we go forward. So we are going to wrap up, and I want to remind people that we did capture a lot of questions that we didn't get to, and we will follow up with answers and distribute those. Also, you will get a recording in a few days. Before you check out and leave us, if you could just answer this last question, we'd really appreciate it. It would give us the feedback we need to tune and improve the work that we do and the messages we help you with and provide. So we'd appreciate that. And for that, after that, I'd just say thank you. Thank you for your time today. We had a great turnout, and feel free to reach out to Rally at any time if you have any more questions. We'd love to help answer those.